Hello and welcome to the Starting Admech series, the series where we go from your first purchase to your first 2,000 point army list and everything in between for the Adeptus Mechanicus forces in the 9th edition Codex. In this video we'll start taking a look at the different Forge Worlds and what they offer for your army when you choose one. However, I should mention this is still early in the new Codex, so things may shift a bit from where this list currently ranks the different Forge Worlds, though at the end of the day this is my best approximation of where the Forge Worlds currently stand. For those brand new to the Admech who have no experience with it, there are 7 core Forge Worlds, and each of these Forge Worlds offers a dogma that functions as a universal buff to your units that belong to that Forge World. It also offers a unique Warlord trait, a unique Relic, and a unique Stratagem only usable by members of that Forge World. In addition to the 7 core Forge Worlds, there's an option for 4 custom Forge Worlds which differ in that they only benefit from gaining a special dogma and forgo the special Warlord trait, Relic, and Stratagem. But as such, the dogma is composed of 2 rather strong parts, one being the primary benefit that is static and the second being a secondary benefit you can select from a list of different options. As such, you can mix and match the different benefits in order to give your unit some rather strong buffs, and as such there are many situations where a custom Forge World can be rather powerful and compete with the various core Forge Worlds. All of that being said, let's look at the first Forge World and the one that is probably going to be the strongest Forge World within the new Codex, that being the Metalica Forge World. The Metalica Forge World is one that has seen massive changes from where it was in the previous Codex, seeing as Metalica was seen as one of the weakest, if not the weakest Forge World previously, but has now moved towards being potentially the best Forge World within the Admech. That being said, the 9th edition Codex isn't the only driving force for how much Metalica has moved up within the ranks, as the Warzone Charadon book added a lot of abilities unique to Metalica specifically, and even prior to the 9th edition Codex, Metalica was starting to see play at high levels due to having access to so many extra stratagems, traits, and relics. As a result of the changes made in the 9th edition Codex, both to Metalica itself and other units within the army, as well as the Charadon rules, Metalica has emerged as the Forge World that has access to so many options that it can easily be considered its own category in some senses. That being said, as a result of Metalica's power coming from a myriad of special abilities, traits, and relics only it has access to, it doesn't mean that Metalica is simply held up by raw power, but rather by optionality, and as such, it can be very tricky to play, making it a rather difficult Forge World and potentially not the best choice for a brand new player. Let's look at what Metalica has to offer in terms of the main 9th edition Codex. To begin with, the dogma Metalica has 3 parts total and is similar but different to its old dogma in certain ways. The first part of this dogma is that units that advance with assault weapons don't suffer a penalty for shooting. With the increase in power to the Vanguard and Corvus Carry, as well as the Iron Strider weapons becoming assault, this is actually rather powerful and offers your army more ability at no penalty. It also has synergy with other special rules that are unique to Metalica, and we'll look at it a bit later. The second part of the dogma is that units don't suffer the penalty for moving and shooting heavy weapons. This isn't the most amazing ability, but it mostly benefits rangers who become heavy weapons instead of rapid fire weapons. However, that being said, Metalica does favor Vanguard more, so the rangers are probably not going to be as big a part of your army as the Vanguard will be in a Metalica detachment. In either case, it's nice to have if you happen to take some rangers within your force. The third part of the dogma for Metalica states that enemies within engagement range are treated as being below half strength. This is essentially -1 to their combat attrition tests that doesn't stack when they actually do fall below half strength, which is alright, but not the main benefit of this dogma, and something that you should keep in mind but not really worry about too much as you play. As a whole, the dogma is reasonably solid and it can be rather useful, but like a lot of what makes Metalica good, it's more of a part of a greater whole that comes together and creates a rather strong power level for Metalica, as opposed to being individually powerful on its own. Moving along, we'll take a look at the Warlord trait that Metalica gets within the 9th edition Codex. The Warlord trait states, at the beginning of your movement phase, select an enemy within 12 inches of your Warlord, and that selected enemy gets -1 to its hit roll with attacks until your next command phase. While Metalica likes getting in close to its opponent, and this can be good at times, there are a ton of great generic Warlord traits as well as unique Warlord traits in the Charadon book for Metalica that probably beat this one out in most cases. Then again, there may be situations where you can find use for this, as it does reduce both melee and shooting hit rolls, but will be a hard sell comparatively to some of those other traits that might end up going a lot further, as we'll see in a very short while. After the Warlord trait, they gain access to a specific unique Metalica relic. The relic they gain access to is called the Adamantite Arm, and what the Adamantite Arm is, it's an additional melee weapon that triples the bearer's strength, has an armor penetration profile of 3, deals 4 damage, and adds 1 to the hit roll of the user, but you can only make 1 attack with this. As long as it's limited to a total of 1 attack, it's just not very playable. Unfortunately, whoever you put this on is not going to be a one-punch man, and in most cases, even if they get that 1 punch through, they're not going to do enough damage to actually warrant the inclusion of this over other and better relics that are available to the different Forge Worlds, as well as the generic relics and the relics from Warzone Charadon that are significantly better than this one. Finally, the last thing the 9th edition Codex has to offer Metalica specifically is the unique stratagem that Metalica gains. The unique stratagem is called Deafening Assault and costs all of 1 command point. What the stratagem does is you select an enemy non-vehicle within 12 inches of a Metalica unit in your shooting phase. That enemy unit cannot fire Overwatch or set to defend, and its movement is halved until the start of your next turn. This can be a rather clutch stratagem in situations where you need to shut down one of those things going into your charge phase, or slow an enemy down to better get into range of a charge for the next turn, but otherwise it's not particularly impressive and will be a rather skilled testing ability, as there is a very narrow use and Admech tends to be a rather command point hungry army to begin with, meaning that the proper use of the stratagem is going to depend on your ability to understand when your opponent is going to want to fire Overwatch or when you need to slow them down for one reason or another. And that's everything the 9th edition Codex has to offer for Metalica. And if this was all there was, I would not have rated Metalica as highly as I have. But now let's look at the overabundance of extra stuff they get from the Warzone Charadon book. We'll start off by looking at the 4 different relics they gain from the Warzone Charadon book that they can take on their Warlord or other characters. The first 2 relics that they can potentially take are 2 weapons that are rather underwhelming, so I'll go over them really briefly. The first of those 2 relics is an Omni Sterilizer, and this is a weapon that replaces the Eradication Ray on a Dominus, and adds a bit of armor penetration and damage, as well as making it an assault weapon instead of a heavy weapon. Maybe in the old 8th edition Codex you would consider this weapon, but with our new 9th edition Codex we have way more options that are better than this, and this weapon doesn't really make the cut anymore. The second weapon option is the Delta Pistol, which replaces the Gamma Pistol on the Datasmith, and it's an underwhelming weapon on what's essentially a rather underwhelming unit by itself. Sure, it hits hard when it does hit, but there are way better options in terms of relics that you can take. So for the most part, you're going to probably ignore these 2 weapons in favor of much better relics that you can find within both Charadon and the main 9th edition Codex. And as such, the other 2 relics are way more interesting, the first of them being the Metallican Lung, which gives the bearer an aura that states that when a friendly Metalica unit attacks an enemy within 3 inches of the bearer, they can reroll the wound roll. This is actually rather powerful, especially now that we have improved Sicarians, Corpuscari, and even Castellans that can function well within close range, whether it's shooting or melee, and even before now the Metallican Lung was definitely a perfectly fine relic to give one of your Warlords. The second relic you can take on one of your characters is the Bionics of Veneration, which give the bearer a 4+ invulnerable save and an aura ability that gives enemies within 3 inches -1 to hit to their attack rolls. This can really make one of your characters rather durable and effective within combat. Keep in mind the Metallican Lung and the Bionics of Veneration benefit the characters as well as the units they are escorting, which gives them a lot more mileage than something that's rather restricted to one character, such as a weapon that has a rather limited number of shots, such as a pistol or the Adamantite Arm, both of which fall flat simply because of how restrictive they are in terms of how many shots they can get or attacks they can make. More so, both the Metallican Lung and Bionics of Veneration are rather good, with a special Warlord trait Ash Runner that Metalica gets within Warzone Charadon, which adds 3 inches to the character's movement and gives them 1 additional strength and 1 additional attack in combat. Combining this trait with one of the 2 relics mentioned previously, as well as a canonical that adds 1 strength to attacks made by a unit, can really add up to make one of your characters an incredibly frightening melee threat. After the Ash Runner trait, there's another trait that can be given to the Warlord that can benefit both melee and shooting, which is Radioactive Emanations, that states that non-Metallica units within 6 inches of the bearer of this trait get -1 to their toughness. It's not the worst ability in the world, however keep in mind the way it's worded, it does hurt your own units if you happen to have non-Metallica units in your army, and it does not stack with other abilities like Rad Saturated, so it'll usually be easier to take some Vanguard in your army than to use this, especially when you consider how many good traits there are to pick from currently within both the 9th edition Codex and the Warzone Charadon book. Most of the time you're not going to take Radioactive Emanations because there are going to be much easier ways to obtain that ability as already mentioned. One last Warlord trait that can be taken on Metallica characters is called Master Annihilator, which allows a character to select a friendly Metallica unit within 6 inches and increase the range of their radium weapons by 6 inches, as well as add 1 strength to those radium weapons. However, there is one caveat to this ability in that the range increase does not stack with other abilities that increase the range of those weapons, but that's not much of an issue considering how many different options you have to make the Vanguard threat radius increase even further. And now that we've covered that trait, it's best to segue into the stratagems, as there's one stratagem that is especially interesting with this trait, that being the March to War stratagem that allows you to select one Metallica unit in your movement phase and set its advance roll to 6 inches automatically for all of 1 command point. This means that if you select a unit of Vanguard, you begin with a 6-inch movement, you add 3 additional inches from the Doctrina if they benefit from it, and another 6 inches from the March of War stratagem, while also adding 6 inches to their natural 18-inch range with the Master Annihilator trait, and as such you create a threat range of 39 inches for that unit of Vanguard, thanks to range weapons now having a range of 24 inches that are basically better bolters, and them having a 15-inch move total. This does eat up a good amount of resources, but the damage and threat range can be absolutely devastating on larger units of Vanguard, especially when considering other potential buffs they can gain, and don't forget they don't suffer from advancing and shooting either, as the Metallica dogma is still in play. On top of all of that, Metalica has yet another stratagem you can use with Vanguard, being the Rad Oversaturation stratagem, which lets you spend 2 command points to increase the Rad Saturation ability to 6 inches for the duration of a single phase. This means extra mobility can also benefit them in getting in range of this ability, as this ability essentially has a 21-inch range when you consider all the mobility benefits you can stack on the Vanguard. This is why the Metalica Forge World is so good with the Vanguard, which are already a rather strong unit, but as mentioned, it does become very resource intensive, and it's very important to time and allocate all of these abilities properly, as mismanaging them can easily lead to underwhelming results. Another special stratagem the Metalica has is called Purity of the Machine, which allows a Metalica unit to ignore all modifiers to hit and wound during the fight phase for 1 command point, unless it's a vehicle, at which point it will cost you 2 command points. This is yet another stratagem that has become better with the 9th edition Codex, as now Admech have far more relevant melee threats than before. Following that stratagem is the Order in Anarchy stratagem, which lets you select 1 unit for 1 command point, and until the end of the turn, when the unit makes an attack against enemies within 12 inches, they gain +1 to hit to their attack roll. This is another stratagem that works rather well with the March to War ability, as well as the Doctrina that increases movement by 3 inches. It's not the strongest stratagem in the game, but is a decent one that has become easier to use due to all of the positioning and mobility that the Admech has gained within the 9th edition Codex. Continuing the theme of close combat stratagems is the Blaring Glory stratagem that also costs 1 command point and allows you to select an enemy unit within 6 inches of a Metalica unit to disable their ability to reroll dice while making attacks for the duration of that phase. This will be generally used within the fight phase. You can pull off some tricks using this in their shooting phase to hurt one of their unit's firepower. As a whole, this is a situational ability that is very strong against enemies that benefit heavily from rerolls. More so, as you can see, many of these stratagems are situational, which allows Metalica to function like a Swiss Army knife when it comes to what they can do. But at the same time, you incur the cost of all of this, making Metalica a higher level of difficulty to play, as you need to know what your opponent is capable of, as well as when it's critical to use these abilities against them, since there will be many situations where you think you might be using one of these abilities, only to find out that you've either wasted command points or your opponent has played around them. There are 3 more stratagems I'll cover quickly that are unique to Metalica in the Charadon book, being the Omnisized Exaltation, which gives an enemy unit within 6 inches -1 to their attrition test, which can work well in conjunction with the third part of the dogma, but ultimately has a limited application, just like all things that focus on the attrition test. The second stratagem on this list is the Extinction Order, which costs a bit too much at 3 command points and allows your Warlord to select a visible enemy within a terrain feature and give Metalica units within 6 inches of your Warlord +1 to their wound roll when making attacks against that enemy within that terrain feature. And this is a rather strong modifier to have, but the command point costs and the various restrictions do harm the application within games, making it a very limited usability that you're probably not going to use as often as you might think. And finally, there's the Knight of the Iron Cog stratagem, which allows a House Raven Knight to have the Admech keyword as well as Canticles. I wish this also gave them the Forge World keyword, as it would allow you to take a Knight within a defense cohort, but as it stands now, it's a nice ability to give Knights Canticles for the low cost of 1 command point. Otherwise, it's not that impressive, and unfortunately, it still doesn't allow you to take a Knight within the defense cohort as much as you would like to. As a whole, Metalica is a world that has an exceptional amount of utility thanks to its sheer volume of special traits, relics, and stratagems that give it the ability to answer most threats. Not only that, but a lot of those abilities benefit things like the Vanguard, which have become substantially better with all of the changes in the 9th edition Codex. And seeing as you can take a Vanguard in blocks of 20 now, the single unit buffs go much further than they did with 10-man units. As a whole, I can see Metalica being a top contender for the best Forge World for some time due to all of this, but it will definitely be a Forge World that benefits players that know what their opponent's army can do and how to best utilize all of that utility that Metalica offers. Though at the same time, because of the potentially high skill ceiling of this Forge World, it may not end up being the most popular or the most common, as it requires so much energy to play, and a different Forge World that is simpler to play as well as having more apparent raw power may end up doing better overall, especially when you consider tournaments you're playing for multiple days or having many rounds, and as such you may find that you begin to fatigue in the final rounds of the event, making it harder to pay the upkeep of mental energy that is needed to run Metalica at its full efficiency. And hopefully this video has shown you why Metalica is a very serious contender for the best Forge World out of all the different Forge Worlds that are available to the Admech forces, seeing that it has so many options that it essentially ends up being a video unto itself, while all the other Forge Worlds will end up sharing videos with one another. The Metalica Forge World definitely stands on its own and has shown us just how much depth a single Forge World can have. So join me in the next video when we continue our look into Forge Worlds and see which other Forge Worlds can be contenders for the position of the best Forge World within the Admech forces. There will be quite a few different contenders that can match Metalica's power, and several that appear to be behind in power, but however might end up surprising all of us and taking the #1 slot. This has definitely turned out to be a very exciting codex, and one that has shown us that they can balance Forge Worlds in such a way to make each one interesting in its own right. Anyway, as always, if you've enjoyed the content, please remember to like and subscribe, as it really does help the channel out. And if you know anyone who can benefit from this video or any of the other videos on my channel, please do share the content, as it can help other players out in terms of buying and building an army. And And as always, I'd like to give a shout out to my patrons for supporting the channel. Thank you very much, you guys are awesome people. And regardless if you're a patron or not, thank you for watching and have a great day. See you next time. Bye.